It's interesting.
I don't know why it feels like a little bit of a crapshoot.
I know.
So welcome everybody. I'm going to get my camera settled correctly here in a second. It is awesome that people are here. Theresa Kulikowski-Gillespie is here also. Do you want to introduce yourself, or yeah, why don't you go first? Because I think most people are coming from,
Yeah, I'm Theresa Kulikowski-Gillespie. I'm a mindfulness meditation teacher and a functional medicine physician assistant, and I'm an author of a recent book, Beyond the Chalkbox. So we're going to talk about that today.
Yes. So I wanted to get on and invite Theresa because, one, she's incredible story and person and does amazing things that I think everybody should know about. And then also because of the new book that is, if you're a gymnastics fan or you're a fan of the Olympics or a fan of elite training, high level training, and what does that look like? This is the book. So I'll just say, so we know each other actually through our friend Lisa Mitzel, who is a mental strength coach. She may be joining in a little bit or just be on here too, because they both went to the University of Utah, so they're in their fellow alumni network. So actually, Theresa, I would love, can we just chat, and we're going to just chat, so like just kind of share what your history is, what you did as a gymnast, like what you do now, whatever you want. Yeah.
What I did as a gymnast. Well, I was a gymnast for 21 years. Had a dream of going to the Olympics from the age of 4 years old. I watched Mary Lou Retton in 1984, and it was really in that moment that I was like, I want to do that. I want to win the Olympics. I didn't want to just go. I wanted to win. Wow. And I had these sayings. So I would write sayings on my wall and I would read them every day. Like, I'm going to win the gold medal at the Olympics. And I was very religious at that time. So it was like, with God's help, I'm going to win the Olympics. And I got close. You know, I missed it by one spot in 1996. And it was that bittersweet feeling of like so close yet so far away. And I wanted to try for 2000, but the next year I tore my ACL and then decided to pursue collegiate gymnastics. So in 1998, I signed with the University of Utah and did college gymnastics, had a successful career there, became a PA. Then I joined the Army as a PA. And then after the Army, I got quite sick, and so I've just kind of been on a healing journey, and it brought me into mindfulness and meditation, and it brought me into functional medicine and writing. So I've written a couple of books, and that's where I'm at right now.
Awesome. Yeah, and like many elite gymnasts, you encountered some pretty big injuries, and there, it's never a good time for injury, but like that was, I think, one of the things that amazes me about elite athletes is the persistence to keep going and come back. You had not one but two ACL tears and surgeries. And I'm curious, and we can talk about the book too now, but to get through that, is that kind of a theme that went through? Because I think pretty much every athlete that you interviewed probably went through something similar. So it's like a common thread that you see or you heard through the interviews in getting through something like that.
Yeah. My first ACL tear was in 1997. And then I came back from that, and then I tore my other one in 2000 in college, came back from that. Then I tore my rotator cuff. That was the last thing that I did in gymnastics. And yeah, a lot of these stories in the book are about overcoming, you know, like either the physical and the injury, or overcoming the heartache, the mental aspect of things, retirement and losing your identity and finding it somewhere else. So the injury piece is huge.
So let's talk about the book. So what inspired you to write it? Well, actually, tell us what it is first.
So the book is Beyond the Chalkbox: Insight and Inspiration from Olympic Gymnasts. What inspired me to write it? So there's actually a backstory to it. I think in like 2019, I had created an online course called Who Am I Now? The Transition to Life After Sport. And I reached out to former collegiate gymnasts who had recently left gymnastics. And I was like, can we do a pilot program? Because I'd like to share this course with you. There were a few interested, but nobody really followed through. And so I was like, well, maybe there's something with the course that I need to look into. And I sent it to my former battalion XO, so one of my mentors in the Army. And he said, I think there's a place for this course in the military. So like in that moment, I was like, oh, I could interview people, I could share their stories. And that was kind of the invention of my first book, Beyond the Battlefield. And then once I was done with that, I still had the writing bug. I still wanted to do more, and gymnastics was like my first love. And so I said, I really want to do this with Olympic gymnasts. And I chose Olympic gymnasts because, you know, that's like the best of the best. And you really get the depth of the experience of the highest of highs and the lowest of lows on that journey. Yeah, so it was a progression. And I found it kind of interesting that, you know, 5 years ago, I wanted to do a sport for gymnastics, kind of with these tools. And then 5 years later, it turned into a book. So it's kind of cool. It was a
Yeah.
convoluted path to get there, but it all worked.
Yeah, and do you think the experience of writing the first book on military, was that part of the inspiration then? Was like, okay, so it's kind of, it is very similar because it's a highly
Mm-hmm.
elite, sort of insular,
Mm-hmm.
right? Kind of life, and you're doing everything, and everything around you is sort of about this thing,
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden it's not there anymore. Or
right.
it is, but you have to figure out what your relationship is to it.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. That's
Yeah.
something that I talk about in the book is like the essence of the person comes through their performance, but that never leaves them. You know, they leave
Uh,
the sport, but who they are came through their gymnastics, but gymnastics is not who they are, you know?
can you say that again? That was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's
said
so, that's, and
who
it's
they,
such a great reminder for, I don't know if any of their parents out there of young athletes, but yeah,
yeah,
so that, yeah.
yeah.
Um,
I said who they are comes through in their gymnastics, but gymnastics is not who they are. And I think it's just important to remember that, and for coaches, parents to instill that in their athlete throughout their career so that when they're done, they know that like they have a solid sense of self.
right. I think you mentioned in the book that like gymnastics is a way that you can express yourself. It's
Mm-hmm.
just one of the ways.
Yeah.
And it's the way for now or for however long, right, you're in the sport. Like this is a tool or an avenue to
Mm-hmm.
express. And then when that's gone, I just find the next thing.
Yeah.
Um, and so what was the process for writing? Like how did you choose which gymnasts to profile? What was that
Mm-hmm.
like getting them kind of on board and all that?
Yeah. I wanted them to be retired because I wanted them to have some perspective of like hindsight's 2020. I wanted them to have different life experiences to then be able to kind of hold their gymnastics experience in a bigger container. And so I went back to 1984. You know, that was the Olympics that inspired
Yeah.
me. And Michelle Ducerre, she was my or one of my elite coaches. And so I reached out to her, and then Tracy Talavera from 1984. And then Michelle actually said, you should reach out to Lucy Weiner because she has a really heartbreaking, but also inspiring story from 1984. So I have those people from 84. And then I've got, unfortunately, I don't have anybody from 88, but 92, I've known Betty Okino for a few years. And then Kim's Meskel, I've somewhat connected with her. So some of this was like, hey, would you mind sharing your story? Some of them I knew well, some of them I didn't. And it's like half and half men and women. John McCready I knew from the Olympic Training Center, and then I got connected to John Roethlisberger, Blaine Wilson through them. There were a few that I really wanted to get, but I didn't get this go around, but maybe I'll get it next time around.
Okay.
But yeah, I really wanted them to be retired for a while. The one exception was Akash Modi because he was willing to do it. I was connected with him. I thought he had a pretty cool story, like Olympic alternate twice.
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
heartbreaking and also
Yeah.
amazing, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and he was just like a few months removed from his career, so it was interesting to see the difference.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. So how long ago, actually, how long ago did the process start? Like, when did you start interviewing? So it was
I
like
was,
years ago then.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was looking back at the first interviews because I was thinking, was it 3 years? But I started my first interviews February of 2022. And my first book hadn't been published yet, and I had started the interviews for this book. But yeah, February 2022 is when I did most of them.
Okay.
And then I did a couple
Wow.
like a little bit
Okay.
later. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was something like, were there any, like, so were there really common threads between them? Because these, I mean, so again, we're talking
Mhm.
about Olympians. And this
Mhm.
is, like you're saying, it's the best of the best. It's such an arduous path. And I think people kind of recognize that. But I think,
Mhm.
I don't know, is there, yeah, so any common threads of, like, around training and how, like in John Roethlisberger, 3 Olympics, and Akash like alternated 2 Olympics, and the persistence and how, like, what's something that they had in common and able to actually keep going, I think is really part of the thing. I guess that's what I'm
Mhm.
asking. Yeah, because that's what I think is so astounding. Like, one, just to go through 1 Olympics, but then to go back and be like, okay, I want to continue elite gymnastics for another 4 years. It's so
Long.
hard,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, where do you think that, what do they rely on?
Mhm. What comes to me first and foremost is something that John Roethlisberger said. He made a comment like, "We know how to be great," because when he was done with gymnastics, there was this struggle of like, we've got such purpose, such, you know, something to drive us forward with the Olympics, and when we're done, now what? But
Mm,
he was like, I realize that I have within me this capacity to be great at something. Like, you know how to work hard, you know how to set a goal and go for it. And that is a common theme, is that they have this drive to be great at what they're
mm,
doing. Um, for better or for worse. You
right.
know, like sometimes that can come with negative repercussions, but I think a lot of them had a love for the sport. Like there was an absolute love for the sport. There was talent,
Yeah.
there was support. Like there are so many things that had to be in place for them to make it there.
Yeah.
But I think initially it was like a love and a desire to be great at it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that burning, like you're saying, like the drive just has to be, and I certainly didn't have this, and I did fairly difficult gymnastics, but I
Mm-hmm.
definitely did not have the drive. Actually, something that comes to mind, excuse me, actually, so for people who are kind of joining in, we're on with Theresa Kulikowski-Gillespie, who is a former national world team member, Olympic alternate. Excuse me. And she's just written a book profiling a number of former gymnastics Olympians. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, right? Um,
Barnes and Noble, yeah.
yep. Pardon me. This is so
Great.
bad to do this like live. Anyway, but I think that that's, I think, something that just fascinates me so much about elite athletes, because I remember actually, so I went to like pretty major gym where lots of like national world team members. There's some couple of people that were on the Olympic team that trained there.
Mm-hmm.
And we had, so the little kids, we were on this TV show, like local show, tumbling like on the like panel mats over concrete. It was like really fun.
Yes.
I was like, this is,
Yeah.
and they asked, they're like, who wants to go to the Olympics? And like a couple of my teammates were like, and I totally, and I saw the recording of it, and I kind of like sheepishly just kind of like, my arm, because I'm like, I can't say
Awesome.
no. Like, I had dreams, but I think I realized, and at that point I had been training, like I was in a really intense program, and I was like, this is, this is not that much fun, and I don't have the desire to do it. But I remember just
Mhm.
kind of being like, yeah, okay, sure. But it's,
They're doing it, I'll do it too.
and I actually did train with somebody, actually somebody who went to the '88 games.
Oh.
Um, but that, I think, it's recognizable, would you say,
Yeah.
like in an athlete who's like, I'm going to the Olympics,
Yeah.
right? Like, and you were, as you were saying, like, I'm not just gonna go, I'm gonna win,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There's something like you, for me, it was like I saw Mary Lou Retton do that at 4 years old, and it was just like, this is my path. I know this is my path. Um, and I think that's what happens a lot of the time is it starts at a really young age. It's like a seed that's planted and the other things are in place. There is
yeah,
talent, there is work ethic, there are parents that are willing to support it. Like my parents, they didn't make much money, and yet they gave everything that they had to support my sisters and I in our athletic endeavors. And it wasn't easy for them.
yeah,
And I have other friends who are like, oh, I have four siblings. My parents just couldn't afford it. And I was like, my parents couldn't really afford it either, but they did it. And I'm just
yeah,
forever grateful. And I'm not putting any judgment on parents who don't, because everybody has to do what's right for them. But for me, it was like my parents were like, okay, you've got the drive, you've got the talent, and we're going to do whatever we can to support you. And so that's a really essential part too.
yeah. Yeah. There are so many pieces that have to come together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so actually we've talked about this a little bit. So you're a mindfulness teacher
Hmm.
working with elite athletes,
Hmm.
um, teaching them what it is, how to incorporate it. And I'm just wondering if you had any inkling of that, like as you were training, or maybe even looking back now. I think we don't know what we didn't have, but like back then, do you remember? I don't know, or just looking back again. So it's what do you feel like could have helped you, could have supported you?
Hmm.
Because we know so much more, both from just the strength and conditioning part, and then the emotional, physical, everything. Um,
Hmm.
what do you feel like or what do you feel like is getting better? Like what do you see
Yeah.
that elite athletes have now that was completely lacking back then?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, When I was training for the Olympics, we started doing more mental training, and I had never had formal mental training. For some reason, in my own mind, I knew about the power of my mind. Like, I remember being 8 or 9 years old, being very afraid of a series on beam. And in my mind, I visualized like watching myself on a tape recorder on a VHS back then. And I saw myself on the TV screen, and then I mentally push rewind on the VHS, and then I would push play and I would walk up and go. Like nobody taught me that. I don't know,
That
but my
I'm
mind has
I'm
always
out.
been
I'm like, what? And this is when you were 8 or 9. First of all, you said you're doing a
yeah.
series on beam when you're 8 or 9, which first like like most kids are learning how to do a back walkover, maybe, or just like a handstand. So you're already working. Anyway, so that's incredible that you had that instinct already.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
there was something, again, like something natural that I knew how to use my mind in a particular way, but
yeah.
I didn't get any kind of formal training until we started reading mental toughness training for sport. And we did like very intentional training before the Olympic trials, because up until that point, I was one of those athletes who was always in my head when I was competing, like thinking about everything and trying to talk myself through it. And I would always mess up in competition. So, like before the Olympic trials, I had keywords, I had my visualization, like I had more of a mental routine, and it made a big difference for me. I did fall, but like the second day of competition was like, I'm just letting it go. I'm in my zone. So that definitely was helpful. And then in college, we had a sports psychologist who was helpful. But for me, what started to kind of like move the needle, and I wish I would have had more of this intentional, like mindfulness, self compassion, like healthy relationship with myself kind of guidance. Because when I was in college, I really struggled with like disordered eating and some mental health stuff. And I
Mm-hmm.
read The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama. And he really talks about some of the Eastern philosophy, like presence and kindness towards ourselves. And even though it didn't change my life, it like planted a seed, which then is what, like years later, I revisited mindfulness and self compassion and loving kindness and like healing my relationship with myself. So I think as an athlete, that would have been helpful.
Um, I'm just curious. So just as a gym fan, and I'm a little bit older than you, but like all the gymnasts that are in your book were all ones that I have watched, and like even yeah, all the way up to. So I'm curious just to kind of come back to the book. So for those of you joining, Theresa is a mental or mindfulness teacher, and she's a former elite gymnast, and she's written a book, Beyond the Chalk Box, about basically what it's like interviewing former Olympians.
Mhm.
So I'm curious to hear a little bit about, not to spoil what's in the book, but
Mhm.
about John Roethlisberger, because I think people kind of know him a little
Yeah,
bit from TV, maybe if they watch the Olympics over the stream. Um, but yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about John.
his
Like if you
story.
want to share anything, like what's like a fun nugget that he
Yeah.
shared or anything.
So he told me about the gym that he trained at the University of Minnesota, and it was this tiny little corner of a building, old and dusty. And he said they didn't even have a full vault runway. So when they were training, it was like they weren't running off of a full runway, and their high bar came out of a brick wall.
Oh my God.
And this is what
Like
they
there wasn't actually like posts. It was like,
no, they didn't have
what?
enough room. Like it was so small. I don't remember, I put it in the book, the square footage, but it was
Yeah.
tiny. But they didn't have enough room for like a full high bar, so they bolted it out of the wall and one post came down.
And you
Um,
better hope you're on, otherwise you're gonna literally hit the wall.
oh
Oh my
yeah,
God.
yeah, exactly. A brick
Yeah.
wall.
Yeah.
But what was very cool is like he's like, I love that gym. He's like, I would give anything to go back into the gym and just grind it out for a day with my teammates, my coaches, do a 2 a day, have that smell of the chalk, have the feeling of accomplishment. Um, he's like, I love that gym. And it was what, kind of gave his gymnastics career a little bit of extra character. And, he wasn't in this fancy facility that fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of the college athletes have this day and age. Like these are $1 million facilities, and um,
Yeah.
but for him, it was like just the day-to-day grind. It
Okay.
wasn't necessarily like his massive accomplishments that he had. Multiple-time national champion, three-time Olympian, five-time NCAA champion, I think. Um, but it was just like the connection with his teammates in that old grungy gym. And that's what
Okay.
he said. If I could do anything, I would just go back into that space and have a 2 a day and just work hard. Like he had grit, like grit and determination, and he worked himself to death.
Yeah.
Just the work ethic was amazing.
And that was, yeah. I feel like, and that's yeah, for 3 cycles to
Yes.
be, and I feel like to be an elite gymnast, like because, and I don't know how different this is actually. Well, you've and you've talked to a lot of other elite athletes, or not necessarily gymnasts probably, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's because in careers are getting longer. So if I
Mm-hmm.
started training, like you started your like kind of more intensive training when you're 4 or 5, right?
Intensive training.
Or more, I don't know, like team level training,
Yeah.
maybe a little
Yeah.
later.
6. Yeah. Maybe 7 years
7.
old.
Okay,
Yeah.
so team level training.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, like we actually people take vacations now, but like back
Yeah.
then, like I remember my family being told like you just can't go on vacation. Like you don't do that, right? Like you don't. And when I went to Japan for like 2 weeks, I got like this intense conditioning set that I would have to do every day. But so that from 7 until now, like 24, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
that's an incredibly long time, and you're identified as being on the elite path when you're 7 and 8, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like you're like, oh, you're going to do right what's called tops, which is this sort of talent identification program, and you're kind of
Mm-hmm.
in this grind for that long.
Yeah.
And so as you were saying, like it's the like I this is something I have to do, like that drive,
Mm-hmm.
right? Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
how do you
Right.
and actually, maybe you want to talk. I don't know if it's about somebody else, but sort of about what your training was like, or somebody in the book that was maybe particularly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess John as an example, right? Or
Yeah.
anybody else.
Yeah. I mean, most of us did two-a-days. We would,
Yeah. From how
once we got to
old? Like
the
how old were
elite
when you
level.
started that?
I was
Okay.
14, I think, is I started homeschooling. So 2 years
Yeah.
before the Olympics. Most of us, I think, around that time, like women, obviously a little bit younger back then, and men a little bit older, but around that age, we were doing two-a-days in high school. And so you'd have to adapt your high school schedule or you'd have to homeschool. Most of us were doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had compulsories back then. So we would do 2 or 2.5 hours of like compulsory, intensive compulsories 3 days a week in the morning. And then we do optionals in the evening for
Okay.
5 hours. And then on our non two a day, we would do like 5 hours of compulsories 6 days a week. So we would always get Sunday off. Yeah.
Okay. Isn't that so interesting that there was compulsories and optionals?
Mhm.
And so now that's however many, 6 days a week, like 34, 5, 6 hours total,
Yeah.
roughly, right?
Yeah.
And now there's no compulsories, and we're still training 35 hours a week.
Really? Okay. I wasn't
Right?
sure what some of the
Yeah.
elite
Yeah.
gymnasts were
So like if
doing.
you're, yeah, like the elite, the kids who are training elite, like national team members, in general, it's like 6, 7 hours a day. And then there's like probably a light day and then
Okay.
one day off. So so it's around 35, 36 hours. And like there isn't all that time doing compulsories. Isn't that
Right. Yeah. We
interesting
were
how
training
that
eight.
happened? I'm like, so we're
Yeah.
like, oh great, no
Drop it
compulsories.
down.
We got more time to train
Yeah.
all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
anyway, so let's
interesting.
talk about what you do now, because
Mhm.
this is the part where I feel like I want everyone to know
Mm.
about what you do and be able to integrate a little bit of what you teach.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Well, right now I draw upon my background as a PA. I'm not working as a PA, so I'm not prescribing medications or like ordering labs, but I draw upon, I don't even know if you can see this, but I brought in kind of a matrix that I use when I'm listening to somebody. So I do like a 90-minute initial evaluation where I get their whole history. So I'm primarily just listening to their story.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you can see this, but I take like on this
Okay.
side of, well, you're not even going to be able to see this, but I can just kind of explain.
Yeah.
I group the things that I'm taking in into kind of three different categories. So, like, what happened before they were born. So, even going into like genetics and were you a vaginal birth, a cesarean birth, because all those things play into how somebody is in mind,
Yes.
body, spirit in this moment. Um, so, brief history on that. And then their whole timeline of their life, like what events in their life changed them for maybe positive ways, what events maybe triggered more negative repercussions. So I put this all on a timeline, and then kind of like figure out how their body, mind, and spirit is all working together, either to help them in certain ways or in ways that they're struggling.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a big part of it. And then we dive into lifestyle medicine too, because sleep is essential. We know that nutrition, movement and recovery. When I talk about stress, I also talk about joy. So like, are you bringing joy into your life? This is where I bring in mindfulness and then relationships. So there's like 5 key areas of lifestyle medicine that we dive into as well. And so that's like the 90-minute initial evaluation where I just really listen and get to know their story. And then we have a lot of close follow up, like I make myself available via email and text, very close follow up that way. And then whenever they want to do another session, we do that for like 45 minutes.
Okay.
Um, and so performance is a piece of it,
Hmm.
but the whole is so much more important to me. Like, are they taking care of themselves in body, mind, and spirit? And I almost say that word is like one thing,
One
body,
thing.
body, mind, spirit. It's not like body, mind, and spirit because you
Yeah.
can't divide it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all one thing. Yeah. That's it. I don't, yeah, and that's actually how I was trained too, is to take a
Mhm.
really extensive history.
Yeah.
Like what is ever, because like so one of the things, like this little catchphrase that I learned is like, the body we have now is the body we've earned through like our cumulative life experiences, right? The brain we have now is the brain that we've earned through our cumulative life experiences.
Oh.
And so, like, because I work with a lot of kids, and so, like, whether or not they crawled for a normal period of time, or did they actually crawl normally? How were they born? Was their birth stressful? Like, these are things that I'm actually starting to add into my questionnaire, because it matters, like, how you move and how your brain has developed from the time you were in utero until you're like 9, 10 years old. Like, that is going to affect how you move now,
Yes.
and how well your mind is working. And so, and the other thing that I ask is, like, it's if somebody has developed, and it could even be from like 20 years ago, if somebody is experiencing pain or discomfort or something, what happened 6 to 18 months ago? Because we don't know, like, it's the what happened before the thing that happened.
Yes,
Right? And so you're
exactly.
doing the same thing, like, what happened before.
Yeah.
um right, because whether it was a, good experiences or traumatic, like, that is going to affect our whole being. And that, right,
Yep.
and that it's not, and that the mind body spirit is, like, right, the, like you said yesterday, like, the physical wellness, mental wellness, spiritual, like, that's one thing. I would
One
actually love for you to
thing.
kind of, yeah,
Yeah.
it's one thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not, and we need specialists
Mm-hmm.
who are experts in physical wellness, experts who are, people are more expert in mental wellness,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not, like, yeah, there has to be, like, a connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I think we're moving in the right direction with athletics, and that we're bringing mental health into the mix, and we know that it's so important. And then we just need to continue to open up to that bigger umbrella of holistic wellness, where it's like we're not dividing out mind and body, because you can't do that. Like, you seriously cannot do that. They're
Yeah.
ever influencing each other. Um, and that's actually functional medicine does a beautiful job of that, because at the root of everything that we do, it's this mind, body, spirit.
Yeah.
And then we look at each of the complex physiologic systems that are influencing health and disease, performance, and know that all of that is ever influencing one another.
Yeah.
And you can use that cycle for positive or negative. Like, if one piece is off, then you've got this downward spiral. But if you address one of those pieces in a positive, helpful way, then you can get
Yeah.
this upward spiral. So
Yep.
it's like understanding the system, you
Yep.
can kind of manipulate it to benefit yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. Like, we have, yeah, that, like, because I think we have the same kind of framework where,
Yes.
right, like, the analogy that I learned and use is that we have a threat bucket. And so that anything that goes into that bucket, doesn't matter what it is, right? It could be school, it could be, like, I had a fight with my best friend, it could be my parents are stressing me out, it could be my nutrition isn't good, my sleep isn't good.
Yeah.
All that stuff can go in, and then eventually, when it gets too full, something comes out of it.
Something
Anyway,
happens.
we've been on for 30 minutes,
Oh,
Theresa.
wow.
I
That
know.
was
I
a
just
fast.
looked up. I was like,
Time
wow.
flies when you're having
So
fun.
actually, if anybody has been
Aw.
hanging out, I'm guessing people that joined at 11 may not be
Not be
on
here.
anymore. But if anybody has any questions, Theresa, again, like, you want to show your book? It's Beyond the Chalk Box.
Oh, yeah.
So it's interviewing a number of former Olympians. So she's an amazing writer. So if you haven't gotten it, yeah, so we can wrap up. Is there anything else you want to
Really
kind of
fun.
add? If anybody is waiting and has any questions, feel free to shoot them up. But I think we'll probably wrap it up here in a second.
You see. Okay.
Yeah, hopefully, I think I'll see. I don't know that people have questions, but anyway.
Well, I just want to say thank you for your work, because what you do is something that would have been very beneficial for me as an athlete, because I was always injured. And I think if I would have learned how to use my brain in these ways that you're training, like to have efficient training, I would have lasted longer. I wouldn't have been as injured. And so I love your work. I mention you in the book because
Thanks. Yep. Thank
what
you
you're
very
doing
much.
is important.
Super flattered.
Yeah, no, yeah, I love it. I love the brain science. We need more of it.
It's all, yeah. Again, it's all one thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think
yeah,
the more that we, consider that, and I think, as you said, like, sports are starting to get there, but it's a climb.
yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway,
One step at a time, but it's great
Yeah.
to collaborate like this and
Yeah.
yeah, support
Get the
each
word
other.
out. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So everybody
Thank
that's been
you.
on, if you have any questions, we're going to jump off in just a second here. But if there's anything burning that you want to ask either me or Theresa, go ahead. Otherwise, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for
All right. I think we're good. All right.
okay.
Bye. Bye,
Bye.
everybody.